The nitrogen storm had been screaming across Vultry 7 for 3 days now, and Marcus Chun was starting to think it might never stop. He sat alone in his small habitat module, the kind of prefabricated shelter that mining colonies gave to workers who had no families and no complaints. The walls shook with each gust of frozen wind, and the temperature display on his console showed numbers that would kill an unprotected human in under 2 minutes. Marcus had seen those numbers before, and he had learned to respect them. Outside, the colony had gone silent. No one traveled during nitrogen storms. The toxic winds carried ice crystals that could strip flesh from bone, and the cold itself was a predator that showed no mercy. Even the hardiest miners stayed indoors, drinking synthetic alcohol and waiting for the weather to break. Marcus was doing neither. He was reviewing salvage reports from an old crash site 30 kilometers north of the settlement. There was good material out there, he was certain of it. Pre-war military tech, the kind that fetched premium prices on the secondary markets. All he had to do was survive until the storm passed, and then he could get back to work. That was when he heard the scratching at his door. At first, he thought it was debris. The storms often threw chunks of ice and metal against the habitat walls, creating sounds that could fool even experienced colonists. But this sound was different. It had a rhythm to it, a desperate pattern that spoke of intention rather than chaos. Marcus stood from his chair and approached the door. His hand hovered over the release panel, and every lesson he had ever learned about survival told him to ignore the sound. Nothing good came from opening doors during nitrogen storms. Nothing at all. The scratching came again, weaker this time. And then he heard a voice muffled by the howling wind but unmistakably real. "Please," the voice said. "I am freezing. Let me in, I beg you. I will reward you." Marcus felt his heart skip. That voice was not human. The accent was wrong. The cadence alien in ways that stirred old memories of war broadcasts and emergency alerts. He had heard voices like that before, during the conflict that had nearly destroyed both their species. It was a Drakari voice. His hand pulled back from the panel. The Drakari were the enemy, or at least they had been until the armistice 3 years ago. Their fleets had burned human colonies across the frontier. Their warriors had killed thousands of Terran soldiers in brutal ground campaigns. And now one of them was dying on his doorstep, begging for help. What was he supposed to do? Marcus closed his eyes and thought of his mother. She had died on Kepler Station when the Drakari attacked it during the 2nd year of the war. He had been 19 years old, working his first salvage job on a distant moon, too far away to even attend her memorial. For years afterward, he had hated the Drakari with a burning fury that kept him awake at night. But hatred was exhausting, and Marcus had eventually grown tired of carrying it. The scratching came once more, so faint now that he almost missed it. "Please," the voice whispered. "I have nothing left, but I swear on the ashes of my ancestors that I will repay you. Just let me live." Marcus opened the door. The wind hit him like a hammer, driving ice crystals into his exposed skin and stealing the breath from his lungs. But he barely noticed, because all his attention was fixed on the figure that collapsed through the doorway and fell onto his floor. She was Drakari, just as he had suspected. 7 feet of scaled reptilian flesh, wrapped in the tattered remains of what had once been a military uniform. Her scales were cracked and discolored from frostbite, and her wings hung limp against her back like broken flags. She was trembling so violently that Marcus could hear her teeth chattering, a sound he had never imagined a Drakari could make. He slammed the door shut and dropped to his knees beside her. "Can you hear me?" he asked. "Hey, stay awake. Do you understand what I am saying?" Her eyes opened, and Marcus found himself staring into vertical pupils that glowed like molten gold. Even half frozen and dying, there was something fierce in those eyes, something that refused to surrender. "Human," she rasped. "You opened your door. Why would you do such a thing?" Marcus did not answer. He was too busy dragging her toward the heating unit in the corner of his habitat. She was heavier than she looked, all dense muscle and bone beneath those damaged scales. But he managed to prop her against the warm metal surface, and he grabbed every blanket he owned to pile around her shaking body. "My name is Marcus," he said. "Marcus Chun. What is your name?" She stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether he was real or some fever dream conjured by her dying brain. "Salith," she finally said. "Salith Vorn. I was a fleet commander before the war ended. Now I am nothing but a refugee, hunted by my own people for crimes I did not commit." Marcus nodded as if this information was perfectly normal. He went to his small kitchen unit and began heating water for tea, the only warm beverage he had. "Wow, Salith Vorn," he said over his shoulder. "You picked a bad night to go wandering in a nitrogen storm. What were you thinking?" A sound escaped her throat that might have been a laugh or a sob. "I was thinking that I would rather freeze than let them capture me," she said. "I was thinking that death in the cold was better than the execution they have planned. But then I saw your light through the storm. I thought maybe there was still a chance." Marcus brought her the tea, pressing the warm cup into her trembling claws. "Drink this," he said. "It tastes terrible, but it will help." Salith took the cup and stared at it as if it were some alien artifact she could not comprehend. Then she looked up at Marcus with those burning golden eyes. "You know what I am," she said. "You know what my people did to yours during the war. Why would you help me?" Marcus sat down across from her and shrugged. "You were cold," he said simply. "I had heat. What else was I supposed to do?" Salith had no answer for that question. She drank the terrible tea and felt warmth slowly returning to her frozen limbs. And somewhere deep in her warrior heart, something shifted in a way she did not yet understand. She had promised to reward this strange human who had saved her life. But looking at him now, she realized that he expected nothing at all. That was the most confusing thing she had ever encountered. The days that followed were strange for both of them. Salith recovered slowly, a Drakari body fighting against the damage that the nitrogen storm had done to her scales and wings. Marcus gave her his only bed and slept on a thin mattress on the floor, refusing all her protests with that same calm shrug that seemed to be his answer to everything. "You are injured," he would say. "I am not. The floor is fine." And that would be the end of the argument. Salith, this behavior was maddening. In Drakari culture, every gift created a debt, and every debt had to be repaid with interest. Kindness without expectation was not just unusual among her people. It was considered a form of weakness, a sign that one lacked the intelligence to extract proper value from a transaction. Yet here was this human, sharing his food and his shelter and asking for nothing in return. It made no sense at all. "I will repay you," she told him at least once every day. "When I am recovered, I will find a way to honor this debt. You have my word as a Vorn." Marcus would just nod and offer her more of that terrible tea. "Sure," he would say. "No rush." His casual dismissal of her sacred promise was almost insulting. Did he not understand what it meant for a Drakari commander to swear an oath? Did he not realize that her word was the only thing of value she had left in this cold and hostile galaxy? But as the days passed, Salith began to study her reluctant host more carefully. Marcus Chen was not a soldier. He was a salvage engineer, a man who made his living by picking through the wreckage of crashed ships and abandoned stations. His hands were rough with work, and his body bore the scars of countless small accidents. He woke early every morning to review his reports and plan his next expedition, and he fell asleep late every night after maintaining his equipment. He worked alone, lived alone, and seemed perfectly content with both. "Do you have no family?" Salith asked him one evening. "No mate or children waiting for you somewhere?" Marcus shook his head. "My mother died in the war," he said. "My father left when I was young. No siblings, no wife. Just me and the salvage." "That sounds lonely." "Sometimes," Marcus admitted. "But lonely is not the same as unhappy. I like my work. I like the quiet. And I do not have to worry about anyone else getting hurt because of my choices." Salith thought about that for a long time. Among her people, solitude was considered a punishment. Drakari were social creatures who drew strength from their clans and their crews. To be alone was to be diminished, cut off from the bonds that gave life meaning. But Marcus did not seem diminished. He seemed complete in a way she could not explain. "Why did you save me?" she asked again. "The real reason, not that simple answer you keep giving." Marcus set down the circuit board he had been repairing and looked at her directly. "You want to know the truth?" he said. "I have buried too many people on frozen worlds. I have seen what the cold does to a body, and I have carried corpses that weighed almost nothing because all the warmth had been stolen from them. When I heard you scratching at my door, I knew exactly what was going to happen if I did not open it." He paused and rubbed his eyes. "I could not just let you die," he said. "Not when I had the power to stop it. I do not care what species you are or what your people did during the war. You were dying, and I could help. That is all there is to it." Salith felt something crack inside her chest, some wall she had built during years of war and exile. "My people would call that weakness," she said softly. "Maybe," Marcus replied. "But I call it being human." The conversation haunted Salith for days afterward. She had spent her entire adult life believing that strength meant dominance, that power meant the ability to take what you wanted from those beneath you. But Marcus possessed a different kind of strength, one that came from giving rather than taking. It was confusing, and it was beautiful, and she had no idea what to do with it. Meanwhile, trouble was brewing in the colony. Gregor Vance was the administrator of Veltra 7, a fat and greedy man who had taken the position because it allowed him to skim profits from the mining operations without doing any actual work. He had spies throughout the settlement, colonists who reported to him in exchange for extra rations or better housing. One of those spies had seen Marcus carrying a large figure into his habitat during the storm. Vance did some checking and learned that a Drakari refugee had been spotted in the system several days before the storm hit. She was wanted by the new Drakari government, branded as a war criminal and a traitor. There was a substantial bounty on her head, enough credits to buy Vance a comfortable retirement on a core world. All he had to do was sell her location to the right people. Vance smiled as he composed his message to the Drakari bounty hunters. He did not care about politics or justice. He did not care that the woman had once advocated for peace between their species. He only cared about the money, and there was plenty of money to be made from turning her over. Marcus Chen was a fool for taking her in, but his foolishness would make Vance a rich man. Back in the habitat, Salith was finally strong enough to stand on her own. Her scales had begun to heal, losing their frostbitten gray color and returning to their natural deep purple. Her wings were still damaged, but she could fold them properly now without pain. "Thank you," she told Marcus as she tested her balance. "I think I will survive after all." "Good," Marcus said. "I was starting to worry about you." "You were?" Salith seemed surprised. "Why would you worry about an enemy?" Marcus handed her a fresh cup of tea and smiled. "You are not my enemy," he said. "You are my guest, and I always worry about my guests." Salith took the tea and looked at this strange human with new eyes. She had promised to repay him, and she had meant it. But now she was starting to understand that any repayment would have to match the spirit of his gift. He had given her life without asking for anything. If she was going to honor her dead, she would have to find a way to give something equally precious. She just had no idea what that might be. Outside, the storm had finally passed. The stars were visible again through the habitat windows, cold and distant and beautiful. Somewhere among those stars, hunters were coming, and neither Marcus nor Salith had any idea how much danger they were in. The bounty hunters arrived on a moonless night, their ship cutting through the atmosphere like a blade through silk. Keth Malachar was their leader, a massive Drakari warrior with scars covering half his face and hatred burning in his yellow eyes. He had hunted traitors across a dozen systems, and he had never failed to collect his bounty. Salith Vorm would be no different. The human settlement is small, Malachar told his soldiers as they prepared their weapons. We find the traitor, we kill anyone who stands in our way, and we leave before the Terran authorities can respond. Simple and clean. His kill squad numbered 5, all of them veterans of the war who had refused to accept peace with humanity. They viewed Salith as a coward and a betrayer, someone who had tried to end the glorious conflict before total victory could be achieved. Her death would be both profitable and satisfying. They landed 2 kilometers from the colony and approached on foot, their dark scales blending with the rocky terrain. The colonists were asleep in their habitats, unaware of the danger creeping toward them. But Salith was not asleep. She stood at the window of Marcus's habitat, staring out at the starless sky with a terrible feeling in her gut. Something was wrong. She could feel it in her bones, that old warrior instinct that had kept her alive through 100 battles. "What is it?" Marcus asked, coming to stand beside her. "I do not know," Salith admitted, "but I think they have found me." Before Marcus could respond, his communication console crackled to life. It was Gregor Vance, his voice thick with false concern. "Marcus Chun," Vance said, "I need you to open your door and come outside. There are some people here who want to talk to your guest." Marcus looked at Salith, then at the console. "And if I refuse?" he asked. "Then they will burn your habitat down with both of you inside," Vance replied. "The choice is yours." The line went dead. Salith turned to Marcus with resignation in her eyes. "You should let me go," she said. "There is no reason for you to die for my sake. You have already done more for me than anyone else in the galaxy." Marcus was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was harder than she had ever heard it. "No," he said simply. "Marcus, please be reasonable. They will kill you." "Maybe," Marcus agreed. "But I made a choice when I opened that door. I decided that you deserve to live. I am not going to change my mind just because some thugs showed up with guns." He moved to a storage locker in the corner of his habitat and began pulling out tools. A plasma cutter, a welding torch, a heavy mining pick with a reinforced handle. These were not weapons, but in the hands of a man who knew how to use them, they could be deadly. "You cannot fight them," Salith protested. "They are trained warriors. And I am a stubborn human who does not know when to quit," Marcus replied. "Now help me barricade the door." Working together, they sealed the main entrance with welded metal plates and overturned furniture. Marcus rigged his plasma cutter to a motion sensor in the ventilation shaft, creating a trap that would fire automatically if anyone tried to crawl through. He scattered metal debris across the floor beneath the windows, creating a field of sharp obstacles that would slow any attacker. Salith watched him work with growing amazement. This was not the behavior of a simple salvage engineer. This was the calculated preparation of a survivor, someone who had faced danger before and learned how to meet it. "Where did you learn to do this?" she asked. "Salvage work is dangerous," Marcus said without looking up. "Sometimes you find things in the wreckage that do not want to be found. Pirates, scavengers, hostile wildlife. You learn to protect yourself, or you do not last long. The first attack came moments later. A plasma blast blew through the door, scattering the barricade and filling the habitat with smoke and fire. Two Drakari soldiers rushed through the gap, their rifles raised and ready. They expected to find cowering prey. Instead, they found Marcus waiting with his mining pick. The first soldier went down with the pick buried in his shoulder, screaming in pain and surprise. Marcus yanked the tool free and swung again, catching the second soldier across the knee and dropping him to the floor. A third soldier appeared in the doorway, and the plasma cutter trap activated. A beam of superheated energy sliced across his chest, and he collapsed with a terrible shriek. Salith joined the fight now, her warrior instincts taking over despite her weakened condition. She grabbed a fallen rifle and fired at the shadows beyond the door, driving the remaining attackers back into the night. Malika roared with fury. "It is one human." He bellowed at his surviving soldiers. How can one human cause so much trouble? But Marcus was not finished. He had rigged the corridor outside his habitat with additional traps, using salvage equipment and mining explosives to create a deadly maze. When Malika led a second charge, the ceiling collapsed on top of him, burying him under tons of frozen debris. The surviving soldiers fled. Marcus stood in the ruins of his home, breathing hard and bleeding from a dozen cuts. His hands were shaking, and his heart was pounding so loud he could hear it in his ears. But he was alive, and so was Salith. She came to him through the smoke, her golden eyes wide with something that might have been wonder. "You fought for me," she said. "You almost died for me. Why would you do that?" Marcus tried to shrug, but the motion sent pain shooting through his injured shoulder. "I told you I would help," he said. "I meant it." Salith caught him as his legs gave out, lowering him gently to the ground. She looked at his wounds and felt tears stinging her eyes, a sensation she had not experienced since childhood. This human had given everything for her. His home was destroyed, his body was broken, and he had nearly sacrificed his life to keep her safe. He had done it without hesitation, without calculation, without any expectation of reward. Among her people, such behavior would be called madness. But Salith was starting to think it might be the sanest thing she had ever witnessed. "I will save you," she told him as she began treating his wounds. "I swear it on everything I am. You will not die, and I will find a way to repay this debt if it takes me the rest of my life." Marcus smiled weakly. "Just some tea would be nice," he mumbled. "When you get a chance." Salith laughed through her tears. The debt between them had grown beyond anything she could calculate. But for the first time, she did not feel burdened by it. She felt grateful. Marcus drifted in and out of consciousness for 3 days, while Salith kept watch over him. His wounds were serious but not fatal, thanks to her quick work with the medical supplies. But the colonial doctor who eventually came to examine him warned that without proper treatment, he might never fully recover. The damage to his shoulder and ribs required advanced medical technology that Valkyrie 7 simply did not have. "He will survive," the doctor said, "but he will carry these injuries for the rest of his life." "I'm sorry." Salith stood by the window of the temporary shelter the colonists had given them, staring out at the stars. The bounty hunters had been driven off, but they would return. Malika had survived the collapsed ceiling, and he was not the type to accept defeat. Sooner or later, he would come back with more soldiers and more weapons. She could run. The thought occurred to her in the dark hours of the night, when Marcus was sleeping and the colony was quiet. She could slip away into the galaxy, disappear among the countless refugees who wandered between systems. Marcus would be safer without her. The hunters would have no reason to hurt him once she was gone. But leaving would mean abandoning the only person who had shown her kindness in years. It would mean breaking her promise. Salith had lost everything when the war ended. Her command, her honor, her place among her people. She had been branded a traitor for advocating peace, for arguing that the Drakari could not win a prolonged war against humanity. The new regime had stripped her of her rank and sent assassins to silence her permanently. She had fled with nothing but the clothes on her back and a single encrypted data chip hidden in a secret pocket. That chip contained the access codes to her old fleet's emergency cache, a hidden vault filled with resources meant to be used only in the most desperate circumstances. Weapons, currency, medical supplies, and communication equipment capable of reaching across the galaxy. Salith had been saving it for her own survival. But now, looking at the wounded human who had sacrificed everything for her, she realized that her survival meant nothing if she could not honor her debts. She made her decision. Using the colony's communication array, Salith transmitted a coded message into the void. It was addressed to the scattered remnants of her old command, Drakari officers who had shared her beliefs about peace and had been exiled alongside her. They called themselves the Exiles now, and they had been hiding in the dark corners of the galaxy, waiting for a sign that there was still something worth fighting for. Salith gave them that sign. "This is Salith Vorn," her message said. "I am alive, and I need your help. There is a human on Vulture 7 who saved my life when I had nothing to offer him. He fought for me, bled for me, and asked for nothing in return. I made him a promise, and I intend to keep it. If any of you still believe in honor, if any of you still believe that our word means something, then come to me. Help me repay this debt, and perhaps we can find a new purpose together." She had no idea if anyone would answer. But 2 weeks later, a ship appeared in orbit around Vulture 7. It was the Ember's Pride, a battered Drakari cruiser that had once served as Salith's personal command vessel. Its hull was scarred with the marks of a dozen battles, and its weapons were outdated by modern standards. But it was still a warship, and it carried a crew of 200 Drakari who had followed Salith into exile. Commander Thren Vakis, her former second-in-command, was the first to transport down to the surface. He was older now, his scales faded to a dusty gray, but his eyes still burned with the fierce loyalty that had made him such a valuable officer. "You called," he said simply. "We answered. What would you have us do?" Salith led him to the shelter where Marcus was recovering. "This human saved my life," she explained. "He opened his door during a nitrogen storm and took me in when any sensible person would have left me to die. He shared his food, his shelter, and his protection. When bounty hunters came for me, he fought them with nothing but salvaged tools and courage. He nearly died because of his kindness." Thren studied the sleeping human with curiosity. "He does not look like much," the old commander observed. "No," Salith agreed. "But he has more honor in his smallest finger than our entire government combined. I promise to reward him, and I intend to do exactly that." The exile ship carried advanced medical technology that the colonial doctor could only dream of. Within hours, Marcus was transferred to a proper medical bay and placed in a regeneration pod. The damage to his shoulder and ribs began to heal properly, and the doctors assured Salith that he would make a full recovery. But she was not finished. Using her authority as the ranking officer among the exiles, Salith launched an investigation into Gregor Vance's activities. The evidence of his corruption was overwhelming, and she transmitted it directly to the Terran Colonial Authority. Within days, security officers arrived to arrest him, and the colonists of Vulture 7 cheered as he was dragged away in restraints. Marcus woke on the 5th day, confused to find himself in an alien medical bay surrounded by Drakari faces. Salith was there, waiting for him. "Welcome back," she said, with a smile that looked strange on her reptilian features, but felt genuine nonetheless. "How do you feel?" "Confused," Marcus admitted. "Where am I? What happened?" "You are on my ship," Salith explained. My people came when I called them. They brought medicine and justice, and they are prepared to offer something more. She knelt beside his bed and took his hand in her clawed fingers. You saved my life with nothing, she said. You gave me hope when I had none. My people will remember what you did, Marcus Chen. And when humanity calls for help, the exiles will answer. This, I swear on my honor as a Vorn. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, then laughed weakly. That seems like a lot for just opening a door, he said. It was not just a door, Salith replied. It was a choice. You chose kindness when hatred would have been easier. You chose courage when fear would have been safer. Those choices have value, and they deserve to be honored. She stood and gestured to the viewpoint behind her, where the stars stretched out in infinite beauty. Stay with us if you want, she offered, or return to your salvage work. The choice is yours, as it always has been. But know that you will never be alone again. You have friends among the stars now, and we do not forget our debts. Marcus considered her offer for a moment, then smiled. I appreciate it, he said. But I should probably get back to Veltris 7. I have reports to finish, and I think my habitat needs some repairs. Salith laughed, a sound of genuine joy. Then at least stay for dinner, she said. I believe I owe you several meals. Only if you have better tea than I do, Marcus replied. And just like that, the debt between them shifted into something new. It was no longer about obligation or honor. It was about friendship, freely given and freely received. Salith Vorn had found her purpose again, and Marcus Chun had found something he had not even known he was missing. They sat together as the stars wheeled overhead, and for the first time in years, neither of them felt alone. 5 years had passed since the night Marcus Chun opened his door to a freezing Drakari refugee. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Drakari exiles, once a scattered band of fugitives, had grown into a legitimate political faction with influence stretching across a dozen systems. Under Salith Vorn's leadership, they had built a new society founded on a radical principle that her people had never embraced before: the keeping of promises. Salith was no longer called commander or traitor by those who followed her. She was called Debt Keeper now, a title that had started as an insult but had become a badge of honor. Her philosophy was simple but revolutionary. A Drakari's word was sacred, and any debt freely acknowledged must be repaid. This applied not just to individuals, but to nations, to species, to the galaxy itself. It was a philosophy born from watching a human share his tea with an enemy. The exile fleet had grown from a single battered cruiser to a proper armada of 60 warships. They protected trade routes, hunted pirates, and offered sanctuary to refugees of all species. Their reputation for honoring their commitments had made them valuable allies, and even the Terran coalition had begun to recognize them as a legitimate government in exile. But the true test of Salith's promise was yet to come. It began with the hegemony. The Kethral hegemony was an empire from the far reaches of the galaxy, a collective of insectoid species that had been expanding for centuries. They viewed other life forms as resources to be harvested, and they had finally turned their attention to the Terran frontier. The first attacks came without warning. 3 human colony worlds fell in a single month, their populations enslaved or exterminated. The Terran coalition scrambled to mount a defense, but their forces were spread thin across hundreds of systems. They sent desperate pleas for help to every major power in the region. No one answered. The Drakari government, still bitter about their defeat in the previous war, refused to intervene. The other spacefaring civilizations calculated the cost of confronting the hegemony and decided that humanity was not worth the risk. One by one, the coalition's allies turned their backs. Humanity stood alone against an enemy that outnumbered them 10 to 1. On Veltri 7, Marcus Chun watched the news reports with a heavy heart. He had continued his salvage work over the years, occasionally receiving messages from Selith and following her rise with quiet pride. He had never asked for recognition or reward, and he had politely declined every invitation to visit the exile homeworld. But now his species was dying, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Then the exile fleet arrived. 63 warships dropped out of hyperspace above the besieged colony world of New Helsinki, their weapons charged and their shields raised. At their head was the Crimson Oath, a massive dreadnought that served as Salith's flagship. The hegemony forces, confident in their numerical superiority, turned to face this unexpected threat. Salith opened a communication channel that was broadcast across every frequency in the system. "Attention, hegemony forces," she announced, her voice ringing with the authority of someone who had waited years for this moment. "These worlds are under our protection. Any attack against them will be considered an attack against the Drakari exiles. Withdraw now, or face the consequences." The hegemony commander responded with mockery. "You are outnumbered and outgunned," he sneered. "Why would you risk your ships for these weak mammals? What could they possibly offer you?" Salith smiled, though the hegemony commander could not see it. 5 years ago, one of those weak mammals opened his door during a storm and saved my life, she said. He asked for nothing. He expected nothing. He simply chose to help because it was the right thing to do. I promised him that I would repay his kindness, and my people do not forget their debts. She raised her hand, and the exile fleet moved into battle formation. Today, I keep my promise. The Battle of New Helsinki lasted for 7 hours. The exile ships fought with a ferocity that stunned both the hegemony and the watching Terran forces. They took terrible losses, losing nearly a third of their fleet in the opening engagement. But they did not retreat, did not waver, did not break. They had made a promise, and they would die before they abandoned it. Reinforcements arrived in the 5th hour. Word of the exile's stand had spread across the galaxy, and other Drakari ships, ones that had not formally joined Salith's faction, began appearing in the system. They came not for politics or profit, but because they had heard the story of the Debt Keeper and the human who had shown her mercy. They wanted to be part of something worthy. By the 7th hour, the hegemony fleet was broken. Their surviving ships fled into hyperspace, leaving behind the wreckage of their invasion and the bodies of their fallen. New Helsinki was saved, and the message to the galaxy was clear. Humanity was no longer alone. On Veltri 7, Marcus watched the exile ships burning across his sky like falling stars. Colonists had gathered outside their habitats to witness the impossible sight. Drakari warships fighting and dying to protect human lives. His communication console beeped with an incoming message. It was Salith, her face tired but triumphant. "Hello, Marcus," she said. "I thought you would want to know that the debt is paid. Although, I suspect it will never really be balanced. You gave me something that cannot be measured, and I've spent 5 years trying to understand it." Marcus felt tears on his cheeks, though he could not say when he had started crying. "You do not have to do this," he said. "I never asked for any of this." "I know," Salith replied. "That is precisely why I did it. You taught me that kindness does not require calculation, and honor does not require profit. You taught me that sometimes the greatest strength comes from opening a door when everyone else would keep it closed." She paused and smiled at him through the screen. "Thank you, my friend, for everything." The communication ended, and Marcus stood alone in his habitat, watching the exile ships form a protective ring around his world. He thought about that night 5 years ago, when he had heard scratching at his door and made a choice that had changed the galaxy. He had not done it for reward or recognition. He had done it because a stranger was dying, and he had the power to help. And now, because of that single act of kindness, Two species were bound together by something stronger than treaties or alliances. They were bound by friendship. Marcus Chen went to his kitchen and made himself a cup of terrible tea. He raised it toward the stars, toward the ships that had come to keep a promise made in the coldest night of his life. "To Salith," he said quietly, "the best guest I ever had." And somewhere in orbit, aboard her battle-scarred flagship, Salith Vorm raised her own cup and smiled. The debt was paid, but the friendship would last forever.